Article 24, personnel records. It should be noted that each public employee has the right to view their personnel record. There has been a fair amount of consolidation of offices and agencies. There are different clusters of agencies, and the long and short story to this is that all of the personnel records are maintained by the personnel cluster group within EOHHS. Other secretariats probably contain their personnel records in regional offices or perhaps in the central office of the agency. But in EOHHS agencies, it's within the cluster group. So personnel files are much more centrally located at this point. There shall be only one personnel record. There are not two or three or any separate super secret personnel records in your supervisor's file. There's only one official personnel record. This sometimes turns up when we file grievances. Copies of any insertions into your personnel record should be given to the employee, and those insertions should be stamped and placed in the personnel record. So the bottom line to this is you should be aware of anything that goes into your personnel record, and you have the right to view your personnel record at any point. You may also challenge the accuracy or the propriety of any of the inserted materials. We have grievances that have been filed for actions put in your personnel record, such as EPRS insertions, employee personnel record, or formal written reprimands. And for a written reprimand, one should definitely write a rebuttal and have that inserted into your personnel record. So let me, at this point, turn things over to David for his take from a management's perspective.
Okay. As a manager, I would encourage employees to view their personnel file at least once a year. This was for the benefit not only of the employee, but of management. This is, as Greg said, because there is only one official personnel file for every employee. And I used to say if the document is not in the official personnel file, it does not exist. It's not uncommon at all for supervisors and managers to keep their own personnel files. These are not personnel files. Your official personnel file should contain any document that management will rely on in terms of your employment. As Greg said, this is particularly important in terms of written warnings. You have a right to rebuttal, should always file a rebuttal against a written warning and make sure it's in your personnel file. Written warnings are removed from the personnel file after 2.5 years if there has been no subsequent discipline during that 2.5 years. If you receive a written warning and no further discipline, you should check your file to make sure that document is removed. You don't have to request that it's removed, but management doesn't keep any kind of a tickler on when a written warning ages out, so check it yourself. The union has a right to a copy of the employee's personnel file with the employee's written authorization. Employees are sometimes reluctant to give this authorization. Stewards can be very helpful in convincing employees to provide this authorization so that the union has access to the personnel file. The personnel file is extremely valuable in defending a grievance of any type, as it provides information about disciplinary actions, performance evaluations, and other relevant documentation such as payroll records, job applications, and designations of weather emergency status. Recently I convinced management to settle a class action grievance concerning snow emergency status, where employees were required to work during a weather emergency, but they were not aware that they were deemed emergency. I requested the personnel file for each and every one of those employees in the class action, and management, number one, felt it was an overwhelming request, but I did have the authorizations. And number two, I'm sure if I got the personnel files, there would be no documentation in that file that any of those employees were designated emergency. So we came to an amicable settlement on that particular grievance. Also, since there is only one official personnel file, any management documentation not in the official personnel file does not exist. So the authorization can be very valuable in proving that management is relying upon documentation that's not in the official personnel file.
Thank you. Richard?
Thank you. Well, David and Greg have covered this article pretty well, and I'd only add a couple of things. First of all, with respect to the personnel file, as both Greg and David have mentioned, written warnings are sometimes issued to employees, and those written warnings are inserted in the personnel file. And members can and absolutely should file a written rebuttal to that warning that's in, and make sure it gets into the personnel file. There is an alternative, however. Individuals can grieve written warnings to Step 2. Step 2 is only within the agency. So an agency is very unlikely to reverse a written warning that it itself had issued. We recommend not filing a grievance because the agency is most likely going to deny the grievance, and then in addition to the written warning that's already in the personnel file, there will be the record of a grievance that was filed and denied on that very same written warning. So we suggest, rather than giving the management an opportunity to double down on the issue that was in the written warning by denying a grievance relative to it, instead individuals should file a rebuttal to that written warning and make sure it gets into the personnel file. So the individual employee's position and rebuttal is on record in the file. The other point that David touched on is that written warnings age out of the file after 2.5 years if there's no further disciplinary action in that period of time. And employees don't actually have to do anything to get the warning out of the file, but it's prudent to do so. I had a case not too long ago where an individual was disciplined again approximately 3 years after the written warning had been issued, and the written warning was still in the file. The employer tried to introduce that written warning at arbitration, stating that, well, it was up to the employee to do something to take that old warning out of the file. He never did it, so we can introduce it at the subsequent arbitration. Well, the arbitrator said, and not so fast. The employee doesn't have to do anything to get the written warning removed from the file after the 2.5-year period. That comes out automatically. If it isn't removed, it is essentially a nullity after the 2.5-year period, whether or not the manager has actually done what it's supposed to do under the contract and taken the item out of the file. In any event, there is that safeguard. I'm just telling you about it, but as David indicated, it is prudent to take a look at your file after the 2.5-year period is run and make sure that that written warning gets removed so you don't have to deal with it again later on. That's all I have.
Thank you both.